Star Trek Strange New Worlds Episode 4 continues on in a rather promising fashion from Episode 3. It continues on with the mystery. It introduces us to what is probably going to be one of the series' primary antagonists here. And once again, the various ingredients that we also saw a bit in Episode 2 are beginning to blend together much better. Like, it feels like this series is beginning to find its footing. Don't you agree?
Yeah, I think that the show is starting to be paced a little bit better in that regard, where you have characters building up mystery, but they do focus in on the characters a bit here. Because in today's episode, we do focus in on a character we have previously, the security chief, who's kind of so far been kind of a plank, not very interesting as a character. And she more or less takes a little bit more of the spotlight. You also take Uhura as well, because they focus in on her a bit more. And they do a little bit more with her character than they did before, which I think was better this time than it was before. I think you'd agree with that note.
Yes, they are growing their characters a bit more here, which I like. And honestly, I also like the fact that they've pushed some of the characters further to the back end, because Episode 2 was focused exclusively on Uhura. And here too, she's being set up as the Mary Sue once more, but it actually moves a bit away from her Mary Sue character, which is a nice thing. And the security chief too, Laan Noonien Singh, which is one hell of a mouthful, also is more developed, because she works through her mental trauma. She faces her pain, she defeats it, and she uses it to save the Enterprise from their current predicament.
Which is actually touching back more so to the older Star Trek episodes, or not show episodes, sorry, older shows where they had similar character-defining moments, where an episode would focus on a couple of characters, but somehow what their escapades and their character growth would affect, you know, the mission or affect the episode in some way, that they have some relevance here. Which is good to see that they are following the more traditional Star Trek sort of storytelling method here in today's episode.
They are. So we begin with the classical Star Trek problem. There's a world out there somewhere who's run out of a crucial doodah, and they didn't bring spares, because that would be smart.
Oops, accidents happen, I suppose.
Indeed. And so the Enterprise is on the way to deliver a brand new ice cream machine, or something similar to that anyways. They arrive, and the planet is completely still. There's an enormous, fire raging across the surface and shit, but never mind. And they can't find any communication. The satellite is destroyed, and they can't figure out whether or not it's, accidental or enemy action. Now, I feel like a satellite being attacked by a weapon would leave some kind of markings, but it's fine. Spock tells me it's fine.
That's true. I mean, you're not wrong. That is a bit of a hole, because the weapons would, unless it was completely obliterated, the debris would be like, okay, well, from debris in real life, we can kind of determine what kind of weapon did that damage, what kind of blast, based on the scorchings and everything else.
Yes, like if we can pick a Boeing 747 off the ground and figure out precisely how it came to be on the ground, surely we can figure this out as well, but oh well, it's there as a part of the mystery, as the mystery is what's going on. There's no communication from the planet. So they send down an away team to pick through the incredibly cheap asset.
Yeah, that was not a very nice set. That was kind of cheap.
Yeah, the set is bad. It is a dark warehouse, as you pointed out when we were looking at this. To the point where there's a glass door, which is one of those glass doors you see on like every shop everywhere, and you can actually see that you can see the area where they've taken away those little warning labels, like no cigarettes here labels, which is like, god damn it.
They've sort of erased it a little bit, like ee.
It's like that is dumb.
It was cheap, and it was sad to see because it was a little uninteresting, but all in all, the episode only spent a little bit on the set because it was establishing the mystery was the focus of today's episode.
And the mystery is not done poorly at all. You see the planet, it's obviously been harassed and destroyed. There's blood everywhere, there's fires, and there's ominous music as they pick their way through the ruins. And it's like already you can kind of see what they're building up to here. This is one of the show's little weaknesses. It still is a little bit too predictable, as one of the refugee girls from a refugee ship that has somehow miraculously managed to get off the planet says that she saw the aliens. It was too dark to see. All she could hear were their clicking noises, and then she starts literally clicking her tongue, which is just a little.
It was a little like it was. I get what they were going for. It was like, oh, it's creepy, like click, 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 click. But it's like during the scene, you're just like, okay, that's a bit much. Or that scene where there's the dude that just smiles, and you're like, okay, right?
Yeah, because
like, it does a few things here, which kind of fall flat.
Of course, it's the Gorn, because Singh has a history with the Gorn. They captured her colony ship, and they made a big deal out of this, how they brought them to their baby world and had their children eat them and use them as breeding sacks, etc. So yeah, it's the Gorn.
Yeah, it was very much obvious from the get-go, especially in the beginning when they focus in on her character, because you know it's going to be about her. And one of the big things they've already established is her traumatic past with the Gorn, so you know right off the bat what this episode's going to be about and what its main antagonist is going to be. Yes. It's not really much of a surprise, sadly.
And that's not to say that it isn't well done, though, because again, the ingredients are there. They are beginning to get massaged into a pretty good plot. It's just they've got a little bit too much Jello on this piece of toast here. Just scrape off a little bit, and you'll be perfect.
Jello? You mean jam? No one puts Jello on their toast. Savage.
That's not true. You can definitely put Jello on toast.
We're not going to get into this debate right now.
But they then discover that this was a trap all along set by the Gorn, which is pretty cool. Okay, they attack the colony world. They've figured out enough about how humans react that they'll send a distress signal, or maybe they sent them themselves, though yeah, I think it was probably a colonist, because they were very stealthy about all of this nonsense, right? Then they leave one of the colony ships up. They even make sure that it's apparently shielded against transporters, so they know that the human ship has to come out, and they have to attach a boarding plank, and they have to lower their shields. Now, this is actually very interesting, because they don't tell you any of this outright, but if you read between the lines, it seems obvious that this is something the Gorn has done before, many times. They know exactly how the Federation is going to act. They know what will prevent them to beam them aboard. They know what will get them to lower their shields, etc.
They kind of have an understanding about how they function, but they do actually learn something new about the Gorn through her past as well.
Yes. It's cool because it establishes a threat. It creates this shadow enemy, which we still haven't seen. We've only seen their ships and their shadows on the wall. Like, this is a good build-up here. Like, they are built up to be monstrous, evil, bloodthirsty, cold-hearted. They even end up sacrificing one of their own ships as the Enterprise dives into, scientific yabbity-yabbity-doo-dah-dee-doodle-doodle to add in a little bit of suspense as, oh, Captain, their ship's creaking. Stuff like
a submarine.
Yes.
Deep underwater.
And they go on like, okay, we gotta flush them out because we can't find them. Let's send a ship in really slow search patterns and hope the Enterprise will shoot at it, which they do. So they go and sacrifice a whole ship just to find the Enterprise's location.
That was kind of nice because that did come off as a surprise. You didn't really expect that, but at the same time, like, it did feel very abrupt when it happens because they released the torpedo and the torpedo impacts into the enemy vessel and it just sort of blows up, but they don't really show it. And it's like, okay, like that was abrupt. Like, I remember you and I were very much like, that's it. That's kind of anticlimactic.
Yep.
And then it's like, well, actually, right as you're like thinking it's anticlimactic, that's when the big boy ship appears with a couple other similarly small patrol ships that they were dealing with.
Yes, a big space-going pretzel appears and is like, dun, dun,
Yeah,
dun.
we need to talk about that. So the ship designs for the Gorn are atrocious.
Yes,
Let's just get that out of the way. Those are hideous ships.
The space-going pretzel is perhaps one of the dumbest spaceship designs I have ever seen in my life.
The patrol ships are just kind of iffy. Like they felt a little bit basic, but the mama ship, oh, it was just a pretzel. It was like a bunch of random little wiggly bits wiggling everywhere, and it didn't quite look like. Yeah, I get it. Like you can have a square in space move. I mean, hell, you had the Borg, but that ship was ugly. Like that's not a pretty ship. That was a hideous ship.
Yeah, like I've got my problems with the smaller patrol crafts as well because they spin needlessly. Yeah. Like, they just spin, and you know that they're doing this because they want to be like, oh my god, the ship, it spins, it looks so aggressive and shit. Like, that's retarded. Like, that is entirely pointless and stupid. The ship would not just casually spin for shits and giggles.
It was aggressively spinning, actually.
Aggressively spinning, indeed.
Weird. It was like a little fidget spinners. That's what those were, fidget spinners, patrol craft. Oh, that's what they look like, to give you a better picture in your mind.
Was a teensy-weensy bit silly, to put it mildly. But, again, the story, the delivery, the mystery, it's all done quite well. It's all delivered quite well. It's just, they're smearing it on a bit thick, and in part, I'm expecting this because they're thinking to themselves, as we talked about last time, the best mystery is the mystery that makes you feel smart for solving it. And the show is doing a very good job in making it possible for the viewers to go like, oh my god, it's the Gorn. You know?
Yep. They give you plenty of time to figure it out with enough clues, but honestly, there's too many clues.
Yes.
Way too many clues.
They can scale it down a pinch, because I'm pretty sure kindergartners are sitting here like, it's the Gorn! Yes, it is the Gorn, Billy.
Yes, it gets really bad when Spock is, like, saying, like, the obvious thing.
Ah, yes.
And it's like, okay. It's like, Spock is a really cool character, and I like Spock throughout Star Trek, but one thing here that I find annoying about this Spock is he says it when it's so plainly obvious to the point where it actually hurts. It's like, yeah, that stung a little.
Yeah, Spock has been relegated to a very much so kind of side character here. I think this episode is the first episode he's contributed something useful by basically saying, Captain, if we turn the compass needle to do the thing and measure the quantity of clouds around us, we can make a radar. And he's like, man, Spock, that's ridiculous, but do it. And it works, of course. But later on, you see a couple of Gorn ships, you see the little patrol craft and the enormous space pretzel blinking lights at each other, and Carl's immediately like, that's Morse code. And Spock is like, why are they scanning one another with blinking lights? Like, Spock, come over here. We need to slap
It's Morse code. Like, anybody who's seen any films, because I remember seeing, like, World War II black and white films with my dad, and the first thing I thought when I saw the two ships, like, blinking at each other, I'm like, they're communicating via Morse code, because if they do it any other means, the Enterprise can pick up their communications.
Yes, they're communicating via light, and they're doing it inside of a nebula, where communication would probably be, nebula, brown star, halo, whoopity whoopity whoop whoop whoop. It's a nebula.
A brown dwarf or something? I'm not 100% sure. I thought it was a gas giant, but I was a little confused as to what it was.
It was certainly something, that's for darn certain.
I feel like it's a gas giant, because it makes sense, right? The deeper they dive, closer to the planet's core, like that in a gas giant, the greater the pressure would be, right? So it was a gas giant, but I didn't really quite catch what it was.
I think you're correct. It was probably a gas giant. But the issue is, again, like, Spock comes across as just kinda stupid here, because you're looking at this like, no, they're obviously not scanning each other, Spock. Like, what the hell?
I don't understand why they're scanning each other. Are you my daddy ship? It's like, okay.
On the bright side, Singh didn't then instantly go like, Spock, you're a tard. They're obviously not doing that. You know, at least they had to do a mind meld to figure it out, because you delved back into her past, like, oh, you've compartmentalized all these horrible memories about being hunted by bloodthirsty monsters in the dark, which makes a certain amount of sense. And she sees her brother, who has given her a notebook explaining how they communicate. And they do communicate in Morse. And this was another one of those overly telegraphed plot points, because you see, she's having flashbacks of a guy, and the flashbacks are delivered in the creepiest way possible. It's a dude's face, and you zoom in so close that you can see the little beard particles on his mouth, and you're like, that's just disturbing, show.
The little stubble, because he's like a young adult, and she's like a little kid, and he was his elder brother, and... yeah, it's very much like he's always smiling, but if you watch the episode more, like in the beginning it's introduced and it's like, whoa, that's awkward, that's creepy. And then as it progresses closer to her discovery, it becomes more apparent that you're like, yep, it's very much he's not actually a bad guy or that somebody that did something traumatic to her. She has a traumatic memory about this character.
Yes. And that too, I called that one immediately the moment I saw him, because it was too reminiscent of the previous episode where they did this exact same trick with the energy wraith things. Like, okay, obviously creepy thing is obviously not going to be dangerous. In fact, it's going to be the exact opposite.
It's actually benevolent, so to speak.
Yes.
It's a cool idea, and I like it when it's done in stories. I didn't mind the Wraith so much because we didn't figure it out like right on the dot. We figured it out before the reveal yet again. But it's one of those things where it's like, okay, don't keep doing the same trick again and again, because it becomes very easy to notice. In the case of this episode, where Arch just literally calls it as soon as it's on screen. That just didn't even take a second.
Yeah, they are beginning to reuse a little bit too many of their set pieces, which is not great, but at the same time, I think again they're trying to find their footing, and things are improving. Like, we've got Uhura, who is stuck in the loading bay or something like that.
Yep.
With
Cargo bay with the engineer, the Anurian engineer.
Yes.
I can never remember his name.
The blind engineer thingy-bob, yes, with the horns on it.
Antlers. No, antenna.
Hammer.
They're called antenna.
Hemmer was his name.
Hemmer.
Yes. Uhura is in there with Hemmer, and Hemmer has his hands crushed by a ice cooler, which Uhura can easily move with her legs. I was like, okay, if you say so.
Listen, it was an empty ice cooler. Okay, we need to talk about that. The ice cooler, you can tell it's an ice cooler because there was a little ice symbol on it, but it wasn't little. It was huge. It's like this big giant snowflake, and it was kind of comical.
Yes.
Like we had to laugh at that. It's like, did you know there's cold stuff in here? Well, we do now.
Like, it was a bit retarded. But they then have to do some fandangling doodadly woodly to make sure the thing doesn't explode, because, you know, they've got to do something while it's stuck in the loading bay, otherwise who would know or care about them? And because Hammer's hand is broken, Uhura has to do it. And I'm sitting there like, yeah, she's just gonna do this easy peasy. No, she actually struggles a bit. Hemmer needs to guide her through it. He only needs to tell her how to do like one thing, and then she figures out everything else by herself. But at least it is better than it used to be. There's even a bit of a humanizing moment where he's like, all right, hold your hands out to the things. And she's like, you mean like this? And she touches the glowing hot thing and goes, ow, that's hot.
As her hand sizzles, and she's like, ah, and he's like, yes, okay, all right.
And Emmer has to be like, don't touch it, you idiot.
That was nice because it breaks the veneer of the Mary Sue.
Yes.
And it starts to humanize her as a character again, as a person that is flawed. Yes. In this case, as an idiot, but you know,
like, that's the thing. That is what so many of the modern day fucking progs do not understand when they're making female characters. A strong female character is not a Mary Sue. They are not a Rey. They are a character like any character which is just superpowers is boring, because it is uninteresting. We cannot connect to the perfect individual. You have to make them fuck up every now and then.
Mm-hmm. That way you can start to be like, yeah, you know, you see the character grow as a person, rather than be handed victory after victory on a silver platter. It's nice to see characters try and struggle and then fail, and how they deal with failure is what makes a character a character. You know, do they pick themselves up and get back at it? Or in the case of some characters, do they mull about for a bit, you know? It establishes them as a person. They're flawed, but they're always trying to overcome their flaws.
Yes. Which is also what they did with Sing here. Now, it comes across as a bit rushed, because Sing is a super strong character. She refuses sedation, etc. She's a hard ass, and that is her only personality. And now suddenly she's like, oh yeah, the Gorn, I've got a trauma with them, and I had a brother that I don't want to talk about and stuff. Like, okay. Don't get me wrong, this is good character building, but I wish you'd spread it out a little bit more. It's kind of like the same problem with Dr. Mabenga's plot point from the last episode, where he's just dropped on you instantly that he's keeping his daughter in the teleporter buffer. It's like, okay, this is good, but you really should have done it a bit slower.
Yeah, they do. I feel like they're this one. They focus on two characters mostly in terms of character growth in today's episode, with Sing and Uhura. I think it would be okay if they toned it down. It's okay to do two characters if they're like growing together. Like, let's say, you know, Hemmer and Uhura trapped together, or in the case of Spock and Sing when they were on the shuttle and they ended up doing the mind meld. It was cool to see the characters interact, but there were some things that every time the show takes a step forward in the right direction, you're like, yes, and then it takes a step back. I do want to point that out, because there are just weird things in the show, like with the crew person's reference that's just randomly thrown in there.
Yes.
Like, I think we all can agree that was pain.
It is still struggling a bit with its wokest past. That is one of the problems. Though, a person gets trapped behind the blast doors, the captain is like, we gotta close the blast doors because the ship's about to blow apart. It's the right decision. One person gets trapped, and the communications officer is like, Captain, we lost a crew person. And just as you're beginning to get lost in this universe, you're just like, crew person. That's retarded.
Nope.
It sounds retarded. She says it as if it's retarded. It's just stupid. It's a crewman, not a crew person.
If the person was female, if the person was male, it wouldn't matter. They're crewmen. Like, that's just the term. They're crewmen. They're crew of the ship.
Yes.
You lost a crew member. If you don't want to say crewman because you're just a flake, just say crew. You lost a crew member, not a crew person. Crew person sounds.
Well, even just crew member would be much better, because you're like, okay, right, you lost a crew member. It doesn't come across as forced. It doesn't come across as immediately out of place, but crew person does. Especially when you then bring into mind the history of Star Trek as of late.
Yep, with STD and Picard. Like, this show, from what I understand, is very much a response to Picard and STD's failings, where they're trying to go back to their roots, and that is a good thing, but they also need to just abandon any of this political modern wokeism stuff. That's holding the show back. And I think it's already too late, because the first season's already been aired, or not aired, but basically recorded and edited. But I think if they can get enough pressure to drop the wokeism, I think this show has a chance to actually be something. If they just drop it completely.
They are moving in the right direction. Like, this is far more of a Star Trek show, as we've already mentioned. Like, this is Star Trek, much more so than any of the previous Star Treks. Like, they are making an attempt. There's just those last few vestiges that still intrude upon the Trekkiness, as you're just like, oh god, that's just little bit more.
I did like the crew scene where they were like, yeah, no, we got to shut off that section of the hull, and they're making the hard decisions in the show, which is good, because they did that in the other ones where, you know, there's crew trapped in that section of the hull, but it's a ship still, you know, not everybody makes it out. If you can't make it past the bulkhead has to be sealed for the rest of the sake of the crew. It's got the dark edges that Star Trek had in the original shows as well. Because Star Trek was a show about like exploration, mystery, but it also had a lot of dark undertones. And so it's good to see that being put here as well. It's just there are just those things that are part of the modern thing that are just holding it back. Like they treat, Spock's character like a little bit like kind of like a monkey on screen, and it's kind of annoying because it's like makes Spock more independent as a character,
Yes, Spock is there, but like Captain Pike, he feels like a side character in somebody else's story.
Yeah, I want Pike to take a bigger center stage role actually in the show.
Yes.
Because anytime Pike is doing stuff, like my favorite scene of today's episode is when they're like, oh shit, we're gonna have to deal with the aliens because of the depth thing. Like we need to prepare for combat. And Pike walks up onto the bridge with his hands behind his back, and he's looking like an actual like proper captain. He's like, prepare the crew for close quarters combat because there's a good chance that they might be boarded. And he's like, we're not gonna be taken alive, not without a fight.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's doing these things which are like, yeah, he's a captain, he's a leader, and he's like taking charge of the situation. I wouldn't mind if they let Pike be a little bit more front and center. I get that they got to build up the side characters, but I do hope Pike takes a bigger role because Pike's character is by far one of the more interesting characters, but I feel like he's kind of waylaid by the other characters too much.
Yep, I think they need to focus a bit more on him on Spock. They do. Because Spock so far has been almost completely useless. Like, he exists because he has to right now. Beyond that, he fulfills very little of a role.
Yeah, and it feels like they need to fix that a bit. There's still problems with the cast choice, like, or maybe not the cast, the actors and actresses themselves, but the character roles, like, they have to work on the first officer. They have to work on the security officer. Like, even though she had today's episode was better, like, she needs to work. Uhura needs to work. And I kind of agree with a lot of the sentiment that's being echoed by a lot of Star Trek fans. And a lot of it stems to they're tired of the wokeism stuff. A lot of them also are very skeptical about the. It's funny because it's a very popular thing that I've seen trending, but it's very much true. The female characters in this show, they need work. Like, I can't think of a single female character that's done particularly well here. Can you?
No, the problem is, again, they come across too tropey. Uhura is... she is the Mary Sue. They managed to build up on her a bit more today, which was very, very good. But in the first scene, she has to flaunt herself. Where Hammer's like, oh, did you know this about the thing? And he's like, it's an air purifier. She's like, oh, you don't know enough. And she just reams off the entire Wikipedia entry on this thing. It's like, yes. I know. Uhura's perfect. Again, when you have a character like this, it does not endear them to me. It actively repels me.
Yes, there's actually something I want to say when we were watching this, to say again for the audience. Uhura is in that weird place where she could very quickly become this show's Wesley Crusher. For those who are familiar, the Next Generation, Wesley Crusher was a Gary Stu, kid character who took over control of the helm as of the flagship of the Enterprise. Everyone was just okay with that, despite not actually going through Starfleet Academy. It was one of those forced things that was like, that's ridiculous. Like, everything that lands in his lap, he did perfectly. They fixed it later on by kicking him off the show. But Uhura is in that situation right now where they need to address that quickly. Because she's going to fall into that same trap where she very much feels like everything just lands in her lap, and she doesn't really deserve it.
Yes. And it makes her repulsive to me. Like, I feel like I want to hate her because she represents that anti-fan self-insert role that I so thoroughly despise. The character that is introduced for the sole reason of taking the piss out of other characters. And she does this here too. In the second episode, the alien linguistic expert touches the glowing rock and gets zapped, so Uhura has to do his job for him. In this episode too, Hammer, the engineer, has his hand crushed, so she has to do his job for him as well. It's like... What are you
Yeah.
supposed to be, Uhura? Like, is no one else capable of doing their job on this ship? How long until Pike is injured and she has to take control of the ship or something?
Oh God, if that happens, I'm gonna roll over in my grave a little bit, but wouldn't be surprised. You raised an excellent point. The issue is every crew member in most Star Trek shows have a role and a job to perform, and that's their character, that's their profession, and they do their job. Sometimes other characters have to help in case of the engineer's injured, but they're always helping. They're never as good as the actual chief engineer, because the chief engineer is the chief engineer. They're the best at their field of expertise, you know? I feel like they need to do that, and they also need to really... Uhura's hairstyle, and the actress they picked, does not look anything like the original actress at all. That hairstyle is atrocious. Or the lack thereof hair. And the hairstyles, it is wearing, because they don't really feel Star Trek-y, they feel wokey. And that's, again, what a lot of people are having problems with, and what I see a problem with this show going forward, is they need to drop the wokeism. Yes. Like, it's not nearly as bad here. It's not remotely as bad as Picard so far, or like STD. In fact, it's very tame, and almost like you can almost like ignore it, except for like the crew person thing, where it just reminds you of itself occasionally. They need to drop it, because if they do that, if they drop the wokeism, the show has a chance.
It is so close. It is so very, very close. It's like the directors are right now fumbling a little bit with the pacing, with the delivery, and with the focus, but it's almost like they're getting better for each episode so far, which is extremely promising. We have gotten now to the point where the wokeism is a annoyance and it brings you out of the immersion. Like it's the shard of glass in an otherwise perfect, milkshake. Just as you suck up that last one, you just feel it crunching your teeth. Like, God damn it, why?
Bit of a surprise. Goodness. Oh, yeah. It's one of those things where it's you can taste it. Like you can taste them being like on the right track. There's still. Not to say there aren't problems, like the sets need work, the ship needs work, there's too much lights on the set, like they just weird J.J. Abrams sort of lighting with like the lens flare thing going on. But if they can just manage to right this ship, like they might be able to salvage it. You know, just can STD and can Picard and then dump that budget in here so we don't get the IBC set again. Oh, but there's hope for that.
There is. Like, it is actually genuinely quite close. And I'm beginning to grow actually genuinely hopeful. I think this could be some pretty damn good Star Trek. And if they can just keep it up, hopefully that belief will be vindicated.